Peter Robbo, and welcome to the Downhill Slide. On this series, we're going to be meeting some of Australia's best freestyle skiers and snowboarders from times past, plus a few internationals too. So get comfy and buckle up for this podcast edition of the Downhill Slide.
I win, you lose. It's only for us two. I win, you lose. I remember days.
Our next guest is a journeyman of many lives. From his early days as a BMX bandit to pioneering Crank snowboarding magazine and competing in Australian freestyle events, to then mixing it with some of the best riders in the world going around at the time, and on to building world-class halfpipes on foreign shores with his mates. Not a bad resume for a life well spent thus far. On this episode of the Downhill Slide, we're going to be getting up close and personal with the rail master, Mr. Phil Burns. Well, g'day, Phil, and welcome to the Downhill Slide.
Thank you. G'day.
No, it's good to have you here, and thought it could be interesting to have a chat about the snowboarding life and times of Mr. Phil Burns. Tell us where it all kicked off for you in the snow and where you went and who you went with.
I had never seen snow until I was 15. My sister and a boyfriend at the time were going down to Smiggins for a weekend skiing. She was in year 12 and I was in year 10. And I'd seen ads in Thrasher and Transworld Skateboarding magazine, or Thrasher mainly, of snowboarding ads, basically the Sims ads. So I had a surfing and snowboarding background, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do the very first time I went to the snow. So I ended up ringing every ski shop in Sydney to try and rent a snowboard. And I think someone finally put me on to Jeff Sawyer, and he put me onto a shop where he'd had his Burton boards into. He'd only just brought them back, and I had to beg my old man to put up the deposit with his credit card for the whole cost of the board as a hiring deposit fee to take down this. It was a Burton Elite with the three fins, the metal blade in the middle of it. And I borrowed ski boots and ski skins, and I taught myself how to snowboard at Smiggins. And that was in 1986, and I was 15. Did a couple of runs. I was like, no, I'm going back to the car to get that Burton rental board. Just took it up. And yeah, so I was learning it in ski hard boots and on the hill by myself. I didn't see another snowboarder that day or that weekend. It was primitive, but I just knew that that's what I wanted to do because I'd seen it in skateboarding magazines. So that was 1986. And then the next year when I was in year 11, we did a week trip down to Falls Creek. And that's where I progressed. And again, I just went with my sister and a bunch of people I knew. I don't think anyone else on that trip was either snowboarding. There was a couple of snowboarders on the hill in 1987 at Falls Creek, but I didn't actually connect with anyone there. I just rode around the mountain by myself and made the most of what it was with primitive equipment.
Prior to that, it was unusual when you ran into someone, you thought, oh, wow, there's another snowboarder. Let's go and meet them, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And so by the time I left year 12, the first year out of high school, I convinced Shane Stevens to come down to Thredbo for a weekend with me. He was 18. I think I was still 17 at the time. We'd gone down, and I think we must have rented boards as well, because the first boards him and I both bought were the next season, 1990, we went to Whistler and Banff. The first year out of school in 1989, we did a couple of trips and rode around the hill, and that's when we first met Timmy Volandis in the bistro at Thredbo, and he was all decked out in his one-piece Quicksilver suit with his mohawk running, and he had the Kemper board he was sponsored, he was riding, and even Canadian Airlines patch on his Quicksilver outfit, and his big Oakleys, I think they were at the time, and you know he was running the whole attitude, the whole ensemble, and you know Shredder as he was known then, and you know we were just two fly-by-nights, you know, two blow-ins on the hill. We weren't in the contest scene yet. You know, he was giving us a lot of attitude, but you know we were looking up, going, oh wow, who's this guy? You know, he's all decked out, you know, bright shiny gear. 89, 90, we went over to Canada, and I convinced Shane to stop in Hawaii so I could surf. And that was the first time I surfed pipeline, and we spent about 4 or 5 days in Hawaii, and then straight to Whistler. So we both bought our first boards in Vancouver. After a couple of days of Whistler, we moved over to Banff for the season, and then so we were learning to ride everything, you know, Deep Powder, Sunshine Village, Lake Louise, And in the February 1990, we entered. So basically, the first snowboard contest that we both did was the Chevron Cup at Canada Olympic Park in Calgary, and it was minus 25 degrees. It was an icy cold, concrete rock hard half pipe, and we got through a few rounds, and then I was sort of trying to push the boundaries and going hell for leather as us Aussies do, and I over rotated on a backside air on a icy kicker and basically knocked myself out in the landing in the bottom of the half pipe, and that made a bit of national news in Canada that night, and I came home with a big black eye.
It wasn't the news you wanted. You wanted to be the shot standing there with the big cup in your hand.
Yeah, that's right. But you had to start somewhere in the comps, and learnt the hard way with that one. The temperatures being so cold as well. But yeah, we spent that about 3 months riding in Canada, and then came back in 1990 to do the Australian season, and started doing the comps. And then we in May that year before the season started, we went to the Snowboarding Australia annual meeting, and that's when we met Dean Adjic and Sean Gall and Willie Mallet. I think also met Dougie Atkinson then. And so we started getting to know a few of the guys then. Shane and I were both Southside boys. We were from the Sutherland Shire and the Cronulla area. I know, as you've interviewed Cal Goodman and Dave Kelly talks about as well, they were all the North Shore boys. But we had a good connection with them. There was no rivalry North Side, South Side at all. It was actually, we'd often head over the Harbour Bridge and catch up with the guys on the northern beaches when we weren't down the snow. But it was the early good times.
Well, you mentioned some very early names there with Dean Adjic and Sean Gall and Willie Mallet. As you already know, I had a number of years in it very early on. Then I stepped away, and then I bumped into some people and got back into it. And Dean was one of the first guys I hooked up with again, and we just got on like an absolute house on fire. So they were sort of, for me, pretty much the driving force in the sport in those days, especially what was coming out of Sydney.
Yeah, it's bizarre because Shane Stevens ended up riding for Dean when he had Clearwater, and Dean put him on a checkered pig snowboard, and I think it must have been 1991 when and then there was a snow demo up at the Newport Arms Hotel, big quarter pipe. I was begging to get into that one. It looked like a lot of fun, and it was only the Clearwater team for all sorts of liability issues, but finally got to strap in a board and have a go. That was a lot of fun that day. It's big turnout at Newport Arms.
I think I remember there's quite a few shots of Tim and other guys there, but you mentioned Tim earlier. The first time I met Tim, he had the mohawk, had the things, and on one side he had a Clearwater sticker stuck on his head, and on the other side he had "This space for rent" written in Texticolor.
Anything for $1. The marketing machine, Timmy V.
Listen, I was quite interested when I was looking up about you. I believe you spent some time at the famous summer snowboard camps back in the USA and Canada. Run us through that. Run us how through that came about and what your experiences were from that.
Sure. That was in 1994. But backtracking a bit before that to set that scene, Craig Kelly and Jamie Lynn and Brian Iguchi and Matty Goodman had come out to Australia for the 1993 Quicksilver Surf Snow Board Riders event. And Wes from Burton had asked Simon Jerusovic and I to look after him on a road trip down the coast before the event at Thredbo started. So I'd met Simon G on the hill at Perisher in about 1991. He was ripping. He was riding pretty good on the mountain, and he saw me riding, and we're both checking each other out, going, "Oh, gee, that guy can ride," and he's thinking, "Oh, that guy can ride." So we actually met on the front valley on the snow at Perisher and became really good mates. And so like 2 years later, 93, we launched Crank Surf Snow Skate magazine, and we took Jamie and Craig Kelly and Gooch and Matty Goodman down to Black Rock and Green Island. They had a motorhome, and we stayed down at Simon's old man had a weekend down there at Hymes Beach. So, we took them out some really good surf, 4 to 6 foot, Green Island. And Jamie was surfing pretty good. Gooch was ripping. Craig had a pretty good style. And started to get a bit big and a bit rocky, a bit dicey. So the boys went in, and Simon and I surfed till dark. And then a couple of days of hanging around down there, we went down to Thredbo and did the Quicksilver Surf Snow event. By 1994, a whole lot of us had gone over to America. We started off at Huntington for the H2O Surf Snow contest. So the surfing was at Huntington Beach, and the snowboarding was up at Big Bear, and you had to be good at both sports to get an invite into it. We were competing with GT, I think he started Von Zipper, and Troy Eckert, one of the main men from Volcom. Bunch of American, pro surfers and snowboarders, and that was a really fun event. We were one day at Huntington, the next day up the hill. And so then I was traveling then with Grant Quinn and Shane Stevens and Jason Haynes and Simon G come with us, I think, on that trip. And we went over to Vegas and we're all sort of hunting sponsors in early 1994. That was around February by now. You know, you're traveling around the Vegas ski show, you know, with a little portfolio trying to pick up sponsors. And I wound up with Decine and Dragon Eyewear, and they were really good to to hook up with, and the products they had were cutting edge at the time. And so then we traveled up to Squaw Valley and spent a few months, about 2 months there, the end of the American winter. And Shane and I then traveled up to Mount Hood and stayed with Rowan Smiles. And Timmy V was up there staying with Rowan at the time as well. So it was the four of us crashing at Rowan's brother's place up at Government Camp at Mount Hood. And that's when so we rode there the end of spring and into the summer when the summer camps were on the glacier. And there was Tim Wendell's camp and the High Cascade snowboard camp. And so I was working with Simon on the Crank magazine. So we were using that journalism angle to get our foot in the door and get lift tickets everywhere we went. And we met up with photographers to do the shoots, and I was gathering their images and sending them back to Australia for issues and editorial. And so it was a good plug, you know. It was a good blag to stay riding. I remember we managed to get to 17 resorts in about 5 months, and we were riding, and I only spent $100 on lift tickets the whole way. So it was a good free ride tour, so to speak. And we were riding like 4 to 6 days a week the whole time too. So a lot of time under our belt. Then I travelled up to Whistler with a photographer by the name Greg Ship, and he's a photographer based in Portland, Oregon. And we got to Whistler and straight up the hill the first day. And so Craig knew I was coming, and he put me up in his own hotel room with Kelly Joe Kelly. They had a spare bedroom in their own apartment in the hotel where everyone was staying, and so that was awesome, you know. Then Jamie Lynn and I were doing the jib bonks on those mailboxes on the side of the half pipe, and was riding there was Little B, Jason Basarich, and a bunch of the US pros as the coaches at Craig's camp, and then we go down and ride the skate park on our BMXs, you know, in the afternoons. It was a pretty amazing trip.
It brings back a lot of memories, you talking about with Simon milking the journalism angle as far as you could. I was a little bit ahead of your time when I went away, so I'm more in the early 80s, and I was working with Powder Hound. I also at the time had a relationship with Fall Line and Slope magazine, so I had a pocket full of business cards with me, because in the old days it was business cards. So every mountain I went to, I flashed the business card, and they were always very accommodating and gave you free lift pass and lined you up with all sorts of activities, you know, hot air ballooning or going for a dog sled ride out to the hot springs, or I went cat skiing. I remember those sort of days very fondly. Yeah, I'm glad to see the Aussies still continue the tradition of of doing things like that, because
we were really surprised. The American ski resorts just turned it on too. You know, they didn't hesitate. They were, you know, they'd really look after us when we got there. We rode out the rest of that summer camp back at Mount Hood. So I didn't come back to Australia until August from February. So I missed half of the Australian season. And I needed a lift to get down to LA to fly out. And the photographer I was hanging out with, Greg, he had a Volkswagen van. I'd also met Christian Hosoi and Christian Fletcher. They were skating at Burnside at the Burnside Skateboard Park in Portland. And Hosoi was on this tour promoting the skateboard helmets. And they went all the way up to Mount Hood to do that. And he travelled from LA in a limo, and he was on a nice junket tour. And Christian Fletcher had been on a bender for 3 days, and Greg and I were shooting and skating at the skateboard park, and I just happened to meet him by chance. And we'd hung out for a few days, and they both needed a lift back down to Huntington Beach area. So the four of us ended up doing a road trip that what I thought was going to take 16 hours took about 3 days. But every time we pulled up somewhere, so I'd be like, you know what, let's get some weed. And he'd pull up in some town, and it was a uni town, and they would be like, oh my God, you're Christian Hosoi. And they just go and line up a bag of weed, and he'd score. And every time we filled up the fuel, Christian Fletcher would get out of the car and skate and disappear. And I'm like, geez, I've got to get this plane flight out of LA, and I'm never going to make it. These guys are just loose. And they didn't sleep. They didn't sleep for 3 days, the whole road trip. But and I ended up doing an article on that too. I ran that in Crank magazine. It was a pretty loose road trip, and we got some good footage and good photos out of the out of the story of the skateboard parks.
Now, you've got a pretty long history with publications. I believe, like you spent some time at Powderhound, but then you emerged or morphed into Crank magazine. So tell us more about all that.
So, well, Crank was actually the first one, and that was a love job. It was all volunteer work. We never got any money out of it. Simon's dad had helped fund it out of his own pocket, and that was like 1993, and Simon ran that for years. And after about the fourth issue, actually, we were working on the fourth issue when Simon had actually was in the back of a car going down the snow for the next year's Quicksilver Surf Snow. I had bronchitis, so I pulled out of that road trip, and he got to Canberra and was tired, and his girlfriend was driving at the time, and the car flipped on a straight road, and he was thrown out the back and ended up in a coma. So he was in hospital for 2 weeks, and we didn't know whether Simon Druzovic was going to live or die. We were on a deadline as well with the magazine, so we were in Canberra visiting him in the hospital, and I was coming back to Sydney. So I basically fell into the deep end of editing. Then before that I was more production manager and organising some ads and captioning photos and organising photographers. But then so I had to finish the magazine off and editing it, and that's how I kind of fell into an editorial role within publishing. And a couple of seasons of that, and we were working late nights. I had a day job in Sydney at the time. I then got the job at Board Zone, which was, I think that was Ski Extras spin-off, the publishing house out of Melbourne. So that I did that for one season, did 3 episodes. I remember one of the photo shoots was when I went into that magazine. When I got the job, I thought about this this opportunity that had happened the previous snow season at Perisher, where there was a Australian snowboard halfpipe title. So there must have been like 1995. We're on at Perisher, and they had a pretty good pipe back in the day, given the time. And we were sessioning this jump on the outside of the halfpipe. So everyone that had their run. So it was an impromptu photo session while the comp was running. And there was Angie Sylvie, Gavin O'Toole, Scott Needham, Trent Roden, Marty Carstairs. I think there was probably about 8 photographers that had all hung around shooting different angles of it. When I secured the job the next year and I had more free rein as editor, I actually contacted all the photographers and got every one of them to send me as many photos from that session as they had. So I ended up being able to run a 10-page spread with a minimum of 2 angles for every shot I ran. Some of it was one shot of Jason Haynes where I actually had 5 different camera angles, all of him doing a method from 5 different angles. That was 96. So then 97 and 98, I was editor of Australian Snowboarder magazine. And I was also ad manager of Snowboarder and ad manager of Powderhound when Reggae Ellis was working there. Then I got a phone call from England, the publishing house that did an on-board snowboard mag, and they needed a new editor. Drew Stevenson had handed in his resignation for about the 5th time apparently, and was ready to move on. And they're like, "Phil, we love what you do with Australian Snowboarder. We'll fly to Austria for a job interview." That was 1998, and I went over there and said, "Look, I'm not a sub-editor. I don't know the grammar and but I can do the ideas and the interviews and the words and captions." And I moved over there in August that year. And I was only with him a few months. Drew had an unfortunate incident at a wakeboard comp and went DUI and had to spend 30 days mandatory locked up in jail in Sweden. That put him astray, and he came back for his job in on board, and they're like, so they didn't need me anymore, so they paid me out, and Drew came back took over his main reins. So I went surfing in South Africa for 3 months, and that was the last time I think I worked in publishing. I came back to Europe after the surfing Jeffreys Bay, and Dougie Atkinson had the contract for the European snowboard tour. So Benny Hazlitt and Dougie and I were building half pipes in Switzerland and Austria and Italy. We did the Burton European Open in Austria, and we did the European Championships in Les Arts in Switzerland, and then we did the World Championships in Val di Sole in Italy. So that was an amazing time too, hanging with the who and the world's best riders, and we're up there shoveling the pipes and grooming them, and getting paid to do it and getting put up in accommodation. So it was it was at the forefront, hanging with the who's who of the sport from all around the world in Europe.
So in the early days with the pipes, were they're all hand built still? There wasn't any machines on the scene yet, huh?
They were just starting to come in then, because that was 98. So in Aximalism in Austria, they had a pipe dragon, but the World Championships in Italy, it was backhoes and hand shovels and excavators. So it was like the equivalent of Perisher Front Valley, and they had to push all this snow to that slope. And Dougie and Benny and I got orange conduit pipes, the stuff you run electrical cable through, and we pegged out a pipe. We made it 140 meters long and 20 meters wide, and we had 4-meter high platforms. So we built this really wide, really skinny taco pipe. So by the end of the second week, it had melted and got wider and wider. But it had a meter of vert at the beginning of it, and so we were up there at 1 a.m. still shoveling along, shaping the sides of the half pipe, and it was backhoe and excavators just plonking the snow there. And then we had to groom it. After each day's competition, we'd be there every night, reshaping it. So by the end of the week, it was a nice wide half pipe.
It's kind of curious because there wasn't really a whole lot of interest in it. I mean, people talk of a snowboard market. There was no snowboard market that I saw. The ski publications were curious, but I wouldn't say more than that. And it was only through a lot of pushing and shoving that we managed to get some articles in. And then I think the guys at Ski Extra said, well, look, what about we do a supplement? The only thing is you need to chase up advertising for it. And so that was a mission because there was no snowboarding companies around to advertise with. So, and then that was kind of what led us into Snowboarder's Edge a couple of years later, which I believe was the first magazine in Australia. A guy I met coming back after being overseas for a couple of years, a guy called Frank Penzis. I hooked up with him through Ali Lentini and Jeff Purcell and a couple of other boys, Danny Monahan, Thor Prohaska. A couple of those guys I'd met earlier on through the old freestyle ski days. Because I used to take my board with me everywhere I went, and if the comp wasn't on or it got cancelled because we had too much snow, then the snowboard would come out and I'd entertain the crowd riding my water ski through the bumps. So
classic times.
Very classic times. And so that's how we hooked up with Snowboarder's Edge, and then it ran for, I suppose, two or three seasons, and then it too went to the wayside. I think we'd probably done as much as we could do with things at the time. And someone was asking me, where did I actually first see snowboarding? Well, I think maybe like you, I saw it in snippets in early surf films. I think 2 or 3 surf films down at the Brighton Town Hall. That was when I first saw, I guess it would have been winter sticking at the time. It was curious, it looked fun, but it wasn't anything more than that. And then I think one day I was reading a skiing magazine from America, and I think Jake Burton had put an ad. He had, in those days, it was popular to have an advertorial, which they sold you the one-page space and the company could use it as they wished. And I think he'd done an expose on Burton snowboards in it. And I thought, wow, that looks amazing. So that's how I ended up getting in touch with him. And we had no idea back then it would grow like it did, and him included. So in Australia with snowboarding, you became a bit of a pro of sorts. Tell us a bit about your time in Australia, cutting it up as the king of the hill.
Funny, I think it was probably also 1991. Shane Stevens had dragged his parents' caravan down to the caravan park opposite the Brumby Bar in Jindabyne, and Simon G and Jason Haynes and Shane Stevens and I all lived in this small little 3-bedroom caravan. And we had the annex, we had a little heater in the drying room for all of our wet gear. And I was coming back and forward to Sydney doing uni. I ended up getting my license as a property valuer in real estate. But back then I was like down there 3 days a week, and we were all competing and starting to do the comps. So by 1994, the time I got back from that longer trip in America, I'd already been to Austria in 92, Canada previously. So so we were doing every comp possible. We were never doing the hard booting stuff. It was all the freestyle, but it'd be a big air and a half pipe and maybe a bank slalom. But I think the big ones for us were the surf snow events. I was never a serious competitor as far as training, or we were more those rat bags, party animals, just doing it for the love of it.
Well, that was the most important training you could do.
That's right. But I never actually won a comp. But we'd actually go around Jindabyne at night and do a bit of skateboarding. In 1994 and in 1995, I actually ended up third ranked in Australia for half pipe, both seasons in a row. And there was something like 5 or 6 or even 8 comps in 1 year. And I remember I was in that 94. I did 13 weekends in a row from Sydney to a comp. So Mount Buller one weekend, Falls Creek the next weekend, one at Guthiga the next weekend, and down to Mount Hotham the next weekend. And so, because I was at uni and working in Sydney as well at the time, so it was pretty exhausting. We drive all Friday night, minimal sleep, and sleep in the car in a ski resort, and do the half pipe comp that day and whatever comp was the next day, and then drive home Sunday night back to Sydney. Shane was still finishing his he was a tradesman probably by then, but he was doing his apprenticeship as a fridge mechanic. Comp wise was good. And by the time I came back from the end of the 1995 season in America, I was pretty much the handrail master. So a lot more of the jib stuff and all those spinning on handrails and flipping off them. That was a lot of fun.
Back in the early days in the 80s, there was only a handful of events each season. I think one or two in Victoria and one or two in New South Wales at best. So
I think the 90s was the heyday of it. I think even this last season was a whole nother story. But I mean, even the last 10 years, I don't know how many comps they've actually consistently run in Australia. There's the odd nationals, but there seemed to be a lot more going on in the 90s. A lot more companies wanting to get involved and sponsor the events.
Yeah, and I think with the involvement of Quicksilver with that Board Riders Cup they used to do, which sort of really trying to pump the crossover sports, and it was very popular here in France as well, where I live. And I think the Aussies have had great success coming over here. Luke Fitcher, Rowan Smiles, there's quite a few interesting stuff. And Marcus Stocker, of course, and there's quite a few good stories from those trips, to the extent where the organiser said we might have to stop the Aussies from coming because they win every time. So,
yeah, that'd be right. I remember one year they ran Quicksilver did a surf snow skate comp in France, and I think Rowan Smiles came second or third overall. He was one of the only snowboarders that could ride a decent skateboard. I think it was I wasn't actually at that event, but I think it was a ramp, a mini ramp or a vert ramp or something. And, that Marcus was really good in the surf snow, and so was Fitch. But when it became a tri-sport, that's where Rowan shined. Marcus took out the he beat Ross in the final or something, and he got the major prize money. It was quite a sizey chunk at the time, and pretty epic events. Wish they kept going.
I think it was a classic year where Quicksilver actually rented a train and they all went up to the Alps. Because in the previous seasons, I think they'd just been going to the Pyrenees. Anyway, on this particular year, they decided to move the crew. The only thing was they forgot to put food on the train. They loaded it with beer, but there was no food. So Kristen Fletcher was leading a beer sliding competition in the disco car because there was so much beer slopped all over the floor that you couldn't walk, so you might as well slide. So they were doing chest sliding competitions from one end of the car to the other.
Too funny. Yeah, I do remember the boys talking about that. I think it was a pretty loose train ride.
Oh, very loose train ride, to such an extent that Quicksilver had to apologise to nearly every community that the train travelled through, and the event was stopped the next year, I think. So
isn't that Quicksilver's motto though? If you can't rock and roll, don't fucking come.
Well, that should have been it, I think. But that was already, they were starting to change in those days by then too, I think. The old grassroots had become a neatly trimmed corporate lawn by that stage. So these days, Phil, what do you do with snowboarding? Are you still snowboarding and keeping your hand in the surf?
I'm still surfing. I didn't ride last year because of COVID. I've had one knee replaced 2 years ago, and I had my hip replaced 5 months ago. But I was surfing 2 months after the hip was replaced. Downhill mountain biking at Threadvale a month ago. 4 months after I had my hip replaced. I think I will hit the snow this winter, getting back on the hill and seeing how the new hip goes. Ideally, I want to head back to Japan for the powder. But the surfing, trying to get out there as often as I can. Yeah, on Sydney's northern beaches.
I was there for a few years back in the early 90s. We're up around Newport and living up to North Avalon there. That's a beautiful place, huh? God.
Yeah,
we must have bumped it. I think you dropped in on me one time. I remember you now.
But not that same wave I dropped in on Kelly Slater at LA. Little Av, but Powderhound and Snowboarder were over the road from the Newport Arms. So I was living above the hill there in 97, 98. In Bungan Beach. But I'm just surprised we never bumped into each other.
We must have rubbed shoulders somewhere. That's inevitable. The trouble is when we get to this age, memories are a bit foggy. So perhaps that's a good thing.
Possibly. I've got another little story for you. There's a couple of photos got published. There's a photo shoot we did up Charlotte's Pass for one of the first 2 issues of Crank magazine. And it was the end of the snow season, so it was really spring conditions. And Shane Stevens and I had actually gone up to Westfields at Miranda Fair, and we'd unbolted this handrail. We were there late at night, unbolting the longest white handrail we could find, and we threw it in the back of his van, hanging out the side door, and we drove it home to his. And the next day we drove down to Charlotte's with this white handrail, and we mounted blocks of wood on it so we could bury it in the snow. And it was like the spring session, and there's a couple of wooden park bench seats we also dragged up there. I think Jason Haynes got an ad for Quicksilver on that handrail, and the shot now you're seeing is of Neil Hardwick sliding that handrail. So the photo of Neil Hardwick sliding that handrail, that was run in Crank magazine in '93, and we were pioneering. We were doing what we could to make the sport happen and keep it creative and fun.
I'd be curious because people like Tim and Dave Kelly would have been, I suppose you'd call them tribal elders these days. What do you recall of these two when you bumped into them for the first time?
The first time we were starstruck with Tim. He just when he's all dolled up in his one-piece Quicksilver outfit with his Kemper, and it was like the next season we met Dave, and I gelled really well because we had a BMX background. We had something else common. I was in the movie BMX Bandits when I was 11. Nicole, 15, I think it was her very first movie, and I think the only movie I was ever in.
And you were her first heartthrob, no doubt.
Yeah, she was just another ranger on a bike. She wasn't anyone back then. It was the very first main role for her. Yeah, I was a couple of years younger than her, and I was stunt riding. I was riding half pipe at age 10 on a BMX. So it's kind of how I got selected for the movie. And Dave was a really good racer, and BMX racing and freestyle. So, and then I just remember one day in the bar at the bistro, Shane and I have been riding at Threadball all day, and that was probably the first interaction we'd had with Timmy V, and we'd bought a jug of beer, and he's coming over and just giving us attitude. Who are these two young punks? Who do they think they are? And he's deliberately spilling beer on my snowboard boots, and I'm just looking at him going, who the fuck do you think you are? What's going on here? So we headbutted a few times, and we worked that out pretty soon though, and been the best of mates since. And I'm going to catch up with him next week. Actually, he's a good man, Timmy V. Heart of gold.
For me, they were the kingpins of the sport at the time, and it was exactly what snowboarding needed.
Yeah, that's right. You're right. They're very chalk and cheese. Dave was so stylish, and he had that finesse. He was top 10 in the USA in the half pipe in, I think it was '89. He had the access to get there, but he just had the skill. He was so smooth, and Timmy V was more, ended up going more the extreme side. When he was going over to New Zealand with Harrow. And just dropping off the hugest cliffs. And when the American pros would come out, Andy Hetzel and a bunch of riders. I remember Noah Selaznik came out, and they're all just going, who the hell is this guy at TV, And he was just owning it. He was just being himself and just, creating new stunts and shenanigans.
When I first met him, when he showed up at Mount Buller in '89 for the expression session, I remember when Tim showed up, I thought, my godfather, look at this guy. Well, but there was nothing expectable about Tim whatsoever. And so there was a lot of interesting shenanigans and stories came out of that first event. I think it was very brave of the Mountain. The Mountain had refused access to us for years and years and years. And then when all this happened, I thought, oh, my God, I can see the door getting slammed shut again. And once this event finishes. But no, they were pretty good. They were pretty understanding. They got it. Thankfully, the doors stayed open. But, yeah, no, they're pretty interesting times. And now, all those guys were very interesting. There was a guy, Eugene King, I used to get on very well with back in the very early days. And I don't know whatever happened to Eugene, but he was a bit like Dave for me. He was a very stylish rider. And
so Eugene, it was always a shy character. He was a pretty savvy businessman, family friends of Simon Jerusalevich. So I met Eugene early on before he picked up SMP when he was doing Wave Rave, and Wes Fab was still working for Eugene, repping for Wave Rave and that brand before Wes got Joyride and then picked up picked up Volcom and then Burton. Primitive days, but Eugene ended up buying the SMP American, the head office. He's married and settled down over there. He's doing well.
He used to throw one of the nicest methods, I think, was going around at the time. This is 88, 89 equipment, but Sean Gore was a very good young rider. Jason Bull, Willie Mallet I met as well at that time. I call them all the Clearwater kids because for me they all seem to be gravitating in an orbital sphere around Dean Adjic with the shop.
Yeah.
And
Dean
that's why I think Dean was brilliant, because I think Dean was Dean was a small rock star in his own right. He wasn't as good a rider as these guys, but he made all that thing happen, and he enabled them to become the fabulous riders that they were. Probably a little bit before their time, I think.
Gawley was a style master. He was pretty fast on the skateboard, and they pioneered a lot of the style into snowboarding, and then just quit the scene and disappeared. Now he's running a recycled timber business out of Mullumbimby.
I remember the old days with Dean. Dean had a trampoline set up at the back of the Clearwater shop, so that was ground zero. That was the training facility.
Yeah. Compare that to these days.
The good old days of Brookvale. When you look back at it, what would you say would be some of your best and your worst moments in the snow? Or do you have a highlight and an absolute low light?
The worst ones would be the injuries, I guess. The worst injury I sustained on the snow was the shred for bread at Perisher in 1997. We progressed. I'd made it to the semi-finals, and it's that image that was up the other day on Facebook with Shane Stevens hits Steve Whitaker in the back in the air over the tabletop finish, and I go flying past both of them. So it was all neck and neck to which two of us were going to make the final. I've come flying past them and won the heat, and they've both gone down like sacks, and then I've gone down flying past the landing ramp to flat, and was winding down the windows and snapped my arm backwards and snapped it in half, both bones sticking out of the skin, and had to go to Cooma that afternoon. And Cooma's like, oh, it's a double compound, you're going to Canberra. And it was actually August the 1st, because I'd broken my leg in the same event, broken my ankle in the same event, same day the year earlier. The binding had come loose and twisted off a flat drop, and I made over the finish line and had a busted ankle, had to go and get that put in plaster. So a year later, I'd snapped the arm in half, and it was actually the day after the Thredbo landslide disaster. So that was 1997. So that happened at like 5 a.m. on a Thursday morning, and then we had the races on the Friday, and I'd snapped my arm about 11 a.m. on the Friday, and by midnight, I'm in Canberra Hospital, and they're like, oh, look, there's a surgeon, he'll get to you, he's just putting some other survivors back together from a car crash, can you wait? And so they come at 3 a.m. and they go, look, that surgeon's still working on those car crash people. Can you wait for a fresh doctor in the morning? And so then I'm like, sure, hit me up with some more morphine. And at 7 a.m. they come and wake me up. They're like, look, they found this guy, Stuart Diver, alive in the rubble. And it's because it's a national disaster. He's actually coming to this hospital. So you'll have to wait. The whole hospital's gone on standby. He's coming here. So I spent the whole Saturday watching the live feed of, the Thredbo National Disaster landslide. And it wasn't until about 3 o'clock that I actually got him out of the rubble. So at 2 o'clock, they said, look, Phil, you can go into surgery. We got the best surgeons in the country on standby. So they put, the plate and 6 screws down there, and the plate and 6 screws down this side. And I had to sleep with it for above my heart in a sling for a week. The swelling was that gnarly. And, Stuart Diver was in the next bed, in the next room, and he had hypothermia, and, tragically he'd lost his wife in that landslide, and but he didn't need any surgery. So that was probably the worst time, that X-ray. But I milked that X-ray down the track later. It's actually it was run on the cover of Planet X Extreme Games magazine, and they put on the cover of the music CD as well. And then Sony, some advertising agency, paid me a few more dollars to use it on Sony Extreme Games in Asia. Yeah, it was a year later. I got the medal out in '98. So then they got some more photos. Nick Farris ran it in Australian Snowboarding magazine of the screws being removed. Yeah, it wasn't the best circumstance. Highlights of the sport. Probably that cover I got was one of my favourites. The Chris Rennie ran from the handrail at Perisher. In general, actually, best times were with Dougie Atkinson and Benny Hazlitt when we were building the half pipes. That was for 2 months, just hanging with the who's who of the sport, like Trevor Andrews and Michael Michalchuk and Daniel Frank and Ingemar Backman, and the list goes on. And we were just hanging with them, riding with them, shaping the pipes, and it was in your element. It was a lot of fun, a lot of different highlights, too many to remember.
How did you end up getting the job of building half pipes?
Dougie had been living in Switzerland, and Dougie was the head of Snowboarding Australia, and then he moved to Europe, and his girlfriend in Switzerland at the time, now his wife, was doing PR work and events for Nest Cafe. He knew a few crew from Europe from the snowboarding administration bodies. He found his niche building terrain parks and half pipes. And when I got back from South Africa, he got that contract to do the 3 events, the European Open and the Burton European Open and the European Championships and the World Championships. I begged him. I was like, dude, come on, you need a hand. And he's like, yep, you're on, let's go. So that was an awesome 8-week tour. I take my hat off, Peter. What you've created with the Facebook thing, it gets people talking. It's and it's out there for prosperity now. It's documented in the digital era. Everyone else is appreciating, the fact that you've created the platform and the forums going forward.
If you're some kind of superhero in this world today, what would be on your list to change?
I think saving the planet. I just watched the Seaspiracy documentary on Netflix today, and the fishing industry. It's not necessarily the plastic straws that are, killing the fish species and the marine life. It's actually the amount of fish that are being commercially harvested. So the saving the ecology of this planet, I think is going to become pretty important to all of us. If I can do more, it's where I want to go.
As I understand, there's no planet B anywhere.
Exactly. That's right. And we don't need that snow to, keep melting or not come back season after season. Got to look after this space.
All right, well, I think I'm going to wrap it up there for this episode of the Downhill Slide. But it's been really good to talk with you. It's been really good to chat with you, and I've enjoyed meeting you, Phil. So, thanks
likewise.
for doing this with us on the Downhill Slide.
Yeah, right on. Keep up the good work.
Will do. Hang in there, brother.
Ciao for now. Thanks.
Well, that's a wrap for this edition. Hope you enjoyed it. And remember to comment and subscribe below. I'm Peter Robbo, and we'll do this again soon with another take on the Downhill Slide.